PCOS is dead. Meet PMOS, the diagnosis that every woman and every women's health coach needs to understand. Over 170 million women have worn the PCOS label over time, but the acronym never really fit perfectly because people with different symptoms and different labs would receive the same diagnosis. Today, I'm breaking down why reclassifying this condition as Poly-Endocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome finally lines up with what we see in real life. Welcome to sammillerscience, where you're joining me nearly 2 decades into my personal journey to bridge the gap between macros, metabolism, muscle, and medicine. If you're joining me, thanks for trusting me to elevate your health and realize your true potential. Each week and inside every episode, I'll be sharing methods and models from my coaching journey and my personal experience, as well as the science that you need to achieve whatever specific goals you're working on in your life. Let's jump in to today's show. We've spent 2 decades or more talking about PCOS as a fertility problem and as a cosmetic problem related to weight loss and body composition. The PMOS framework forces us to confront something a little bit bigger. Conversations around central adiposity, dyslipidemia, impaired glucose regulation, modified TDEE, or long-term cardiometabolic risk. Today, I'm walking through how to shift from just thinking about fixing menstrual cycles or ovarian health to completely recoding metabolic health and using this criteria. Now, according to The Lancet, Poly-Endocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome, which was previously named PCOS or Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, affects roughly 1 in 8 women. But the term PCOS is somewhat inaccurate. It implies pathological ovarian cysts, obscuring diverse endocrine and metabolic features, and contributing to delayed diagnosis, fragmented care, and stigma while curtailing research and policy framing. That's a direct quote from The Lancet. Now, this breaking news is possibly one of the biggest updates in the past 20 years because the shift in language from PCOS to Poly-Endocrine Metabolic Ovarian Syndrome actually makes a lot of sense and reflects where the physiology has been pointing for years in terms of what we see with internal health and just overall making some scientific sense of the matter. First, let's recap what the traditional PCOS diagnosis criteria was and talk a little bit about the exclusion of other disorders as well. Now, the condition is diagnosed in adults, so women over the age of 20 years, meeting at least 2 of the following criteria. Now, these international guidelines include oligoanovulation, clinical or biochemical hyperandrogenism, and then the third criteria is polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound or elevated AMH. Now, with this acronym being used for years, it resulted in many women with different underlying physiology getting placed under one big umbrella or Western medicine label. Women with PCOS present very differently and they can have different root causes, even though they share this diagnosis when they go to the OB's office or whoever may have given them this diagnosis. The term polycystic suggests ovarian cysts are the defining feature of the condition, but clinically, a lot of women diagnosed with PCOS don't have ovarian cysts, or it wasn't part of their diagnosis, or they didn't have an ovarian ultrasound. Many women with ovarian cysts also don't have PCOS. This new title depicts PCOS not simply as an ovarian disorder, but as a poly-endocrine metabolic condition. Now, poly-endocrine, the reason this is better is it's really giving us a bigger picture of the entire hormonal network, or it's attempting to describe that entire hormonal network and internal health. And if we break the word down just in terms of its root structure, poly means many. Endocrine is typically defined as pertaining to hormones or the release of these hormonal signals. Metabolic means metabolism of an organism, and syndrome is a set of symptoms or a condition associated with a set of symptoms. So this new naming accounts for the crosstalk between the ovaries, the adrenal glands, pancreatic function, pituitary, and even the brain at the level of the hypothalamus. So instead of only focusing on cycle symptoms, we begin to investigate things like C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker, looking at fasting insulin, stress, sleep, androgens, which have historically been part of the conversation, and also looking at the gut and the immune system as well. The word metabolic is arguably the most important addition. You might think I'm biased, but inflammation, insulin resistance, stress, and metabolic dysfunction were some of the most common drivers of the PCOS physiology that we've come to know today. So the word metabolic shifts the attention away from just reproductive symptoms and broadens the lens for overall evaluation of women's health. It basically forces us to zoom out and see the totality of the person's health and their entire circumstances and condition, or at least hopefully That's what we'll be aiming for in future years. Modern research and clinical practice has consistently revealed that inflammation and immune metabolic dysfunction matter too, not just insulin resistance or hyperandrogenism. Women with PCOS commonly experience elevated CRP, higher interleukin 6 levels, TNF alpha, oxidative stress, and even gut microbiome changes. We've had evidence dating back to even 2018 that CRP to albumin ratio correlated more strongly with PCOS than androgen excess or insulin resistance alone. So it's good to see modifications in naming that actually account for more of these body-wide changes or overall bodily adaptations. And with a better name, we can start to ask better questions, because the old name overemphasized how do we fix the ovaries, and it understated what metabolic conditions or what type of endocrine environment is actually contributing to the ovarian dysfunction that the woman is experiencing in the first place. Because PCOS isn't just a problem solely at the level of the ovaries, there's usually something triggering that, or underlying health issues that are at least contributing. So research and clinical experience has indicated involvement across multiple endocrine systems. So the first part, we've got the hypothalamic pituitary signaling, which is the connection between the hypothalamus and pituitary. Then from the pituitary downstream, we have LH and FSH, so luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. That signaling can contribute to follicular dysfunction if those ratios are off, specifically greater than 3:1 of LH to FSH. We have adrenal contribution, and some women have elevated DHEA or adrenal-driven androgen production that may contribute to worsening symptoms. Then factor in things like insulin signaling changes and sex hormone changes, and you start to see how these cases unfold. Hyperinsulinemia, or high insulin, suppresses SHBG and increases ovarian and adrenal androgen production, worsening ovulatory dysfunction. Also can lead to more circulating free androgens if there's more free testosterone. Androgens, progesterone, estradiol, and sex hormone binding globulin all interact downstream. So Poly-Endocrine reflects what a lot of coaches or clinicians and even some providers have already seen. This isn't a single gland issue. It's actually crosstalk between the ovaries, the adrenals, the pancreas, pituitary, and the hypothalamus. So this is why so many women with PCOS also showed that central adiposity that we talked about, dyslipidemia or skewed lipid levels, glucose regulation issues. And this isn't just limited to fasting glucose. That could be A1C or fasting insulin or even oral glucose tolerance tests. They may have lower metabolic flexibility and higher long-term cardiometabolic risks. So having that word metabolic in there pertaining to metabolism shifts the attention away from only focusing on reproduction. We can actually look at energy regulation, insulin sensitivity, cardiovascular health, and so many conditions and considerations that are important to women's health, not just now in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, but for an entire lifetime. While this Lancet paper primarily focuses just on naming and a change in acronyms, I do think this is a win from a women's health perspective. The question is it going to take 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years for this name change to make it into conversations in OB offices or endocrinology clinics? And can this have downstream effects or changes in prescriptions or on the standard of care that women receive when they go to the doctor? I think it's too soon to tell. If today's conversation around the evolution of the PCOS naming to PMOS sparks something for you, or if you're someone who's been interested in women's cycle health or fertility, understanding things like insulin sensitivity, or even understanding androgens and sex hormones, or you're involved in this conversation around inflammation, oxidative stress, want a better understanding of gut health, and even endocrinology that we talked about today, that is exactly why FNMS exists, because most coaches and health professionals were not taught to connect those dots, and education stops typically at macros, calories, sets and reps, and basic body composition struggles. Very few health professionals can explain why one woman's case is driven by insulin resistance and someone else may be struggling with stress and adrenal androgen output, or someone else who's struggling with chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, or gut dysfunction. Inside FNMS, we teach you how to move beyond the labels and acronyms, because even though many clients had this diagnosis, they didn't have any type of relief. They were still struggling with their symptoms. And we want you to understand the physiology that's driving whatever case is in front of you. When your client is dealing with irregular cycles or hyperandrogenism, maybe a fat loss plateau, could be struggling with fertility, it's important to be able to interpret these patterns, connect the biofeedback in the labs, and build a strategy that's actually rooted in what's going on with your your client's internal health instead of just random guesswork, heading over to ChatGPT, which can be wrong in many cases, or playing Dr. Google. So if you want to become the coach that understands these hormonal aspects and metabolic aspects and lifestyle drivers underneath it all, FNMS was built specifically for you. You can learn more in the show notes or head over to metabolismschool.com. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, please share it with a friend because you likely found the show because one of our original listeners or students shared it with you, or maybe leaving a 5-star rating review caused the show to pop up in your algorithm, and it's why you originally downloaded the episode and pushed play. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. I'll talk to you guys in the next show.